Welcome to Interesting Synergies, a series where we discuss some of the more unique and useful interactions between mechanics and Path of Exile. In this episode, we'll go over the synergy between a unique jewel, Dissolution of the Flesh, and the reservation skill, Petrified Blood. We'll also discuss some combinations with other mechanics which can create an incredibly strong base to build a character around. Firstly, let's talk about how each mechanic functions. Dissolution of the Flesh is a unique jewel that can only be acquired from the Searing Exarch. This jewel sets your maximum energy shield to 0 and provides a massive more multiplier to life, up to 30% more life on a max roll. Dissolution of the Flesh then grants a special mechanic that cannot be found anywhere else in the game. Any damage that you take is instead reserved as life reservation. As long as you keep taking damage, you'll continue to reserve the damage you take against your life pool, but once you stop taking damage from all sources for 2 seconds, the life reservation will be fully removed. If you reserve all of your life, you die. It's important to note here that any life reservation that gets removed doesn't recover actual life automatically. For example, if you reserve 30% of your life from damage, and then you have a period of taking no damage from any source for 2 seconds, you'll no longer be reserving 30% of your life, but your actual life will be at 70% immediately following the removal of the reservation. Under normal circumstances, you'd then be able to recover your life back to full using things like regeneration or leech. Alright, now let's discuss Petrified Blood. This is a reservation skill that reserves 35% of your mana to apply a buff. The buff prevents you from recovering your life above 50% from all sources except for the use of life flasks. The Petrified Blood buff will protect the lower half of your life. Any damage that you take from hits to the lower half of your life is reduced by 40%, and then depending on the level of the gem, a percentage of the damage that was prevented from the hit is then lost over the course of the next 4 seconds. A few important notes here. Firstly, the damage that is prevented from hits and then lost over time is not considered to be damage over time. This is because the damage was taken from the hit at the point of impact and prevented by the buff, which then causes life loss over time. Also, the buff doesn't interact with damage over time in any way, which means that if you were to use Petrified Blood normally, you'd essentially be lowering your effective health against damage over time by half, assuming your life is always at the maximum recoverable amount of 50%. For hits, our effective health is also lower. This is because with Petrified Blood active, and while you are at the maximum recoverable life of 50%, you can only take a hit of 83% of your total life. So you've lost 50% of your effective health against damage over time and 17% of your effective health against hits. Why would you ever use Petrified Blood? Well, the skill serves as a method of enabling a low-life build that focuses on using life as the main health pool rather than energy shield. Low life is a term for when a character is at or below 50% life, and it enables options such as Pain Attunement or the Bloodthirst Support Gem, amongst other things. So, what happens when we combine these two mechanics together? We're reserving Petrified Blood against our mana to gain its buff. Let's say our life is at 50% and we're not using any life flasks to go above that threshold. What happens when we take damage while also using Dissolution of the Flesh? We begin to reserve life based on the damage we take, but notice that we are essentially reserving life that we don't have. That's because in Path of Exile, reservation always goes against your total resource pool rather than the amount of the resource that you actually have. Because our actual life is at 50%, the life we are reserving from the damage we take from hits is only 60% of its actual value due to the Petrified Blood buff. Remember that this only works for hits. The prevented damage is lost over time from our actual life and not reserved because, as we mentioned earlier, this is not considered to be damage over time. What's happened to our EHP now? As discussed earlier, Petrified Blood does not apply to damage over time, but since we are now using Dissolution of the Flesh as well, our effective health against damage over time is once again at 100% because we can reserve our entire life pool against damage over time. But for hits, our effective health has increased massively. Because we are using Petrified Blood and we can reserve our entire life pool against damage from hits, we can take a hit of 166% of our total life. Our effective health against hits has increased by 66% compared to a character at full life that's not using Petrified Blood or Dissolution of the Flesh. And when compared to a character that is only using Petrified Blood and is at 50% life, our effective health against hits has doubled. We still need to make sure our actual life doesn't drop to zero due to the life loss from damage prevention. This can be achieved through various methods of recovery such as regeneration. However, there are a few methods in particular that have great synergy with the mechanics we're already using. Firstly, let's talk about Leech. Life Leech is a mechanic that essentially recovers your life based on a portion of hit damage dealt. Leech is normally only applied if the resource is below the maximum, so for example, after you've taken damage, you'll be able to recover from that damage via leeching. However, Life Leech is removed when you reach full life. But because we are using Petrified Blood, our life can only recover up to 50%. Which means that any instances of Life Leech we have will continue to work even when we reach 50%, as we're technically missing life and we never reach full life. This means we always have Overleech as long as we are hitting enemies and dealing damage. Whilst that's a great form of recovery to be used in this scenario, there's one better still, and that's Recoup. Life Recoup is a mechanic that recovers life based on a percentage of hit damage taken over the course of 4 seconds. The reason why Recoup is so useful with Petrified Blood in particular is that you can achieve an exact amount of recovery to perfectly counter the life loss from damage prevention. Let's take the example of a level 21 superior Petrified Blood with 20% quality. The buff from this gem prevents us from taking 40% of the damage from hits we take, and makes us lose 75% of that over the course of 4 seconds. By acquiring exactly 30% of damage taken recouped as life, we will be able to perfectly counter the life loss from damage prevention, and both mechanics will cancel each other out. This is because we will still recoup life based on the original hit before it interacts with Petrified Blood. For example, we take a hit of 1000 damage. Of the 1000 damage, 600 is dealt to us instantly, and 75% of the remaining 400 is lost over the course of 4 seconds. Because we took a hit of 1000 damage and we have 30% of damage taken recouped as life, we will recover 300 life over the course of 4 seconds. These mechanics already have incredible synergy together, but there are other things you can include to improve it even more. Strength of Blood is a keystone that can only be acquired from the Lethal Pride Timeless Jewel. It needs to have commanded leadership by count to be the correct keystone. When socketed into the passive tree, the jewel will dominate any keystone in its radius, converting it into Strength of Blood. This keystone prevents Life Leech from recovering life, but instead converts it to make you take less damage. The baseline maximum total life leech that a character can achieve without any other modifiers is 20% of maximum life leeched per second. That would be converted to 10% less damage taken if we were to use Strength of Blood, and as mentioned earlier, because of Petrified Blood we have Overleech. So as long as we are hitting and dealing enough damage to reach our leech cap, we'll receive the maximum buff that Strength of Blood can provide. But what about if we were using the recoup strategy that was discussed earlier? As long as we have enough recoup to fully counter the life loss from the damage prevention of Petrified Blood, we no longer need any other forms of life recovery. This means that Strength of Blood in combination with Vol Pact becomes a very strong option. The downside of both keystones, the loss of life recovery from Leech and the loss of life regeneration, have no effect on us as we no longer need those resources. Vol Pact doubles our maximum total leech rate up to 40% of maximum life, so Strength of Blood would provide a 20% less damage taken buff as long as we are consistently hitting our maximum total leech cap. This can even be improved further with modifiers that increase maximum total life recovery per second from Leech. What's even more impressive about the buff provided by Strength of Blood is that unlike Fortify, which only applies to hits, the less damage taken modifier applies to all damage we take, even damage over time. Quite the combination of mechanics to create the base of a very powerful Exile. But there are other avenues you can take too. The Eternal Youth Keystone is another way to solve recovery. This one is especially useful if you want to spend a lot of life, for example on skill costs, or if you're sacrificing life through the use of certain unique items. Eternal Youth cuts your life regeneration rate and your maximum total leech cap in half, but it also applies the energy shield recharge mechanic to life instead of energy shield. We're using dissolution of the flesh, so we have no energy shield anyway. The interesting interaction here is that energy shield recharge works by restoring energy shield at a baseline rate of 33% per second, but by default it's interrupted by damage that's dealt to energy shield. You need a period of 2 seconds of taking no damage to your energy shield for the recharge to begin. By taking Eternal Youth, all of those mechanics now apply to your life instead, so the percentage scaling is applied to your total life and any damage you take to your life interrupts recharge. You'll also need a period of taking no damage to your life of 2 seconds before recharge starts. The thing is, because we are using dissolution of the flesh, we are technically reserving life instead of taking damage, and this means our recharge will never be interrupted. What's more, because we never reach full life since we are using petrified blood, our recharge also never stops. That's a permanent 33% of maximum life recovered per second. This is incredibly advantageous when used in combination with an item like Wrathpith Globe, which sacrifices a large percentage of life every time you use a spell, or Dark Pact, which similarly sacrifices a percentage of life to deal damage. However, the loss of 50% of maximum total life leech granted by this keystone is enough to make Strength of Blood a far weaker choice, although due to the amount of recovery you'll have, you're unlikely to be needing the recoup, so that's one less resource you'll need to invest in. So, we've talked a whole lot about all of the upsides of this combination of mechanics, but what about the downsides? Well, the biggest downside with using petrified blood, as mentioned earlier, is the extreme weakness to damage over time. Whilst the addition of dissolution of the flesh does theoretically double your effective health against damage over time, it also creates new issues such as excluding recovery as a defensive mechanic to counter damage over time. There's also the fact that lingering damage over time such as ground effects or poison stall your ability to create the 2-second window you need to recover from damage you take. In general, avoidance of damaging ailments and ways to avoid hits pair very well with dissolution of the flesh. For example, the unique Helmet Maw of Conquest not only makes poison deal no damage to you, but it also has the nice bonus of providing some of the life recoup that you need. Mechanics that help you to avoid hits such as evasion and block are also extremely powerful in combination with dissolution of the flesh, as it will help to afford you the time you need to recover from any damage you take. That's just about everything for this episode. If you enjoyed this video, please consider clicking the thumbs up button to help the algorithm and subscribe for more content like this in the future. I'm Dreamcore, this has been Interesting Synergies, and as always stay tuned and stay safe.